Hello everybody, and welcome to the YouTube channel of Skip Allen. Today I'm going to try and answer a question that I think is probably the most frequently asked question of all time in Painter, and that is, why won't my brush paint on a layer? And there are several reasons for this, and we're going to cover them all. But before we get started, I want to let you know that I've brought down, this is my brush selector. I brought it down here so that these panels would be closer at hand and we could see what was going on without having to move the video around. I have a custom palette with 3 brushes that we're going to work with. I've opened up the general brush control panel, and you get that from Window, Brush Control Panels, General. And I have up here the brush search utility that's inside of Painter now. It's normally up in the property bar on the far right. And over here, I've got my layers panel. Okay, so let's look at the layers panel and determine a couple of things here. Number one is the canvas layer is a specialized layer, and there's a number of other specialized layers in Painter, but the canvas layer is specialized. And it's specialized in the sense that it is filled by default with white paint, okay? So the canvas layer has white paint all over it. Regular layer, the default layer, is not. It doesn't have any paint on it. It is completely transparent. And you know it's transparent because of this sort of checkerboard pattern. Okay, now let's look up here. We have an icon that says Preserve Transparency and an icon that says Pick Up Underlying Color. I'm not going to worry about Pick Up Underlying Color, but I am going to worry about Preserve Transparency. Now, before I do anything, I'm going to come over here to this oily bristle brush, and I want to show you that it can paint on the layer, right? Okay. Now I'm going to turn on Preserve Transparency, and you do that by clicking on it, but you have to move your brush away after you click on it to make sure that it is actually blue. Once it stays blue and your stylus is not on the top of it, it's active. See, I can turn this one blue, but it's not active, and I know that because when I pull away from it, it goes back to that dark gray. All right, with Preserve Transparency on, I cannot paint on the layer. And that's probably the most obvious thing that can happen if you can't paint on a layer. And you know that we're sort of switching up, moving around quickly in this panel. And if you get just a little bit too close to your tablet, you can activate that thing. So if your paintbrush will not paint on a layer and you think it should, then the first thing to do is look at Preserve Transparency. Also know that, let's go in and paint something on it again. If Preserve Transparency is on and you have some pigment on the layer, where it is currently transparent, the brush will not paint. But if you paint over existing pixels, then the brush can paint on that. So it's just where the lines are, the checkerboard pattern, that you cannot paint. Okay, so that's Preserve Transparency. Let's turn that off and we'll get rid of what's there. All right, now let's go to a different brush. We're going to one called Coarse Wet Bristle. Now the Coarse Wet Bristle paints fine on the canvas, but if you go up to a layer, it does not. That's because certain brushes require that there be pigment on the layer before it can paint. Sort of like the Preserve Transparency, if there's pigment there, then that area is not transparent, so you can paint on it. Well, there's certain brushes that require that, and those brushes all have the method plug-in from the General Brush Control panel. They will have a method plug-in, or they will have a method, we'll switch to the grainy wet sponge, they'll have a method of drip. In the case of drip, there are 4 subcategories, and all of them require that there be pigment on the layer for you to paint. If we go back to the coarse wet bristle, you have a plug-in, and the subcategory is liquid brush. Well, the truth is, all of these subcategories require that there be paint on the canvas with the exception of glow brush. That's the only one that doesn't require that there be pixels available. Okay, so let's look at what we're talking about. We've got this coarse wet bristle. We painted with it, got to come down to the canvas. We painted with it on the canvas layer. We come up to the regular layer and we cannot paint. We come over here to the oily bristle, which does paint on a layer. And in that case, we can paint on the layer, and then we can switch back to our coarse wet bristle and paint. It would be nice if it were a different color. And we'll be able to paint on the pigment that's there. Okay? So that's the gist of it. Plug in, and drip method brushes require that there be pigment on the layer to paint. All right, so I can hear you groaning now and saying, yeah, but how am I going to know which ones are which, because I don't want to have this general panel open all the time. Well, let's go up here to the brush search engine, and we're going to search for plug-in. And so all of these brushes that we see are plug-in brushes. And bring your attention down here to the stroke preview, and you'll see that there are diagonal gray striped lines. And if I hover over the brush, it will show me what the brush looks like going through those gray lines. And so you have a Sargent brush, a coarse smear, a runny blender, a bulge, and so forth. And they all have the gray stripes until you come to fire. Now, if I click on fire, I'm still in plug-in, but I have a subcategory of glow brush. So all of these, with the exception of the glow brush, cannot paint on the canvas. I mean, on a layer. But the real knowledge, or the thing that really will help you, is the stroke preview. If you see gray stripes, that means that brush will not paint on a layer. So if I go to my brush selector, and let's go to Artist Oils, I still have a stroke preview down here. So right now it's showing me that the Sargent brush cannot paint on a layer. If I go up to the top, Auto Van Gogh can, Coarse Sargent cannot, Impressionist can, Sargent cannot, Sargent Super Jitter cannot, Seurat can, Tubism can, Van Gogh can, and these two custom brushes that I was making cannot. Okay, so you can tell by those gray diagonals. Now, there's only one problem here. I wish Painter was always consistent, but it's not. Here, if we go to the grainy wet sponge, which is a drip brush, and we go up here and type in drip and do a search, then look what we have for coarse oily blender in blenders. This is a drip brush, no gray stripes. So in the case of drips, it doesn't tell you, or there, in my opinion, there's no real easy way to know which ones will or will not paint on a layer. But as long as you know when you're on a layer and you start to paint, and you know that the preserve transparency is off, you know that the brush selector isn't showing a diagonal, it's showing something else, and it won't paint, 9 times out of 10, you're probably on a drip brush, okay? So that means you'll have to paint on the canvas or paint something on the layer first, and then you can come in and paint on the pixels already there, but not out here. Okay, so that's the gist of it. You want to look for your preserved transparency first. You want to look at the brush the brush stroke profile. Is that what it's called? I can't remember. Let's go and we'll open up Drip. This is called the, come on. All right. I can't find it. Let's see if it'll tell me down here. Stroke preview. That's what it is. Stroke preview. It didn't tell me, but I finally remembered. So look at your stroke. Look at your preserved transparency. Then look at your stroke preview and see if you have diagonal lines. And if you don't, if you don't have diagonal lines and stroke preview is not on, more than likely it's a drip brush, and you'll have to go to your general tab to check it out to see if that's the case. And if it is a drip or a plugin, you could paint on the layer with another brush, fill the layer with white if you'd like, or move the canvas layer up to its own layer. As long as there's paint all over the layer or around the layer, you can paint on that layer with a drip or plug-in brush. All right, I hope this helped. It's kind of complex, the way I explained it is anyway. But once you get the idea, it's really easy. You'll always know which brushes will paint on the canvas and will not paint on a layer unless it already has some pigment on it. Okay. Have a good day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.